Greetings YouTube, and welcome to my channel. Welcome fellow humanity, peace, love, light, harmony, and thanks for tuning in. So if you watched my previous video, you would know I was talking about your diet, your spiritual diet. Today I'm going to be talking about what is your ego. It's pretty simple. You got five senses. You obviously have a sixth sense. Your sixth sense is thought. That's essentially your spiritual sense. It's not necessarily a part of your ego. It can become a part of your ego, but it's more of the spiritual world for the most part. So your five senses. Physically speaking, taste, touch, sound, smell, sight. Your ego is essentially the operating system in which we compute or process said video game reality, if that's the way you'd like to think about it. Your brain is like a hard drive. It's like the things that are actually taking place as said computer is operating. The screen is essentially your eyes, keyboard your touch, and taste, smell, and hearing. Well, we don't have the technology for that, so you can kind of just fill in the blanks. And you'll soon realize that all of the information that we know about computers is actually taken from the way the brain operates. All of the information that we know about how engines operate is actually information that we take from the heart and how it pumps blood. So a lot of the technologies that we know of, we actually get from our operating system, our natural technologies. Essentially the way that our ego operates is how we fundamentally interact with this world. So essentially you're beamed into the existence of said body. The first thing that's created in the womb is your pineal gland, and then your heart, and then the body forms, then you're out, and then you start developing your sight and ears immediately because you've never used them before. What would happen if you left a baby in the dark for the rest of their life? They would learn how to see in the dark for the rest of their lives. But as soon as you put them out in the light, you're going to blind them. And that's just essentially the way it works. Physically, they would learn how to see in the dark. That doesn't necessarily mean that they would spiritually know how to see in the dark, which is also based on cultivating thought or said meditations of the spiritual perspectives of one's self or soul, however you want to word that or think of that. So your ego essentially is the physical interaction of how we think. And a lot of people think that they're their ego. That's only a half truth. So for example, everything has a cause and effect. And so the effect here is the ego. But the cause is the fact that as a soul, as a divine being, or you decided to incarnate or live inside of said body or ego or what you think as yourself. And as you know, you define yourself with said name. My name's Isaac. Hey, nice to meet you. And I'm not Isaac. I'm not. I'm inhabiting Isaac. And I could legally change the name of what I'm inhabiting. I know it to be Isaac, so I inhabit Isaac. Or I am inhabits Isaac. So, truly, I'm essentially just inside of a computer, inside of a computer game. Or this could be the controller, and I'm inside the computer game. So you are not your ego. You can be your ego if you define it as your ego. If you defined it as your whole being, essentially. So that's when we get the whole concept of immortality, because you shed the ego. You don't identify with the ego. You're not all of the ego. And all of the information that you know of as your ego obviously sticks with you, but it's not your ego and it's completely separate. So you're cultivating the separate part. And you're becoming more and more in tune with said separate part. That is higher and first and foremost prior to said physical world. Whereas the ego, fully identifying with the ego, your life is limited, absolutely. Because you are absolutely in the physical world and only associated with said physical body, physical name, physical operating system. And so, if you know, as you know, roadkill feeds the earth. Anything that dies feeds the earth. We've all watched The Lion King. The circle of life is a real thing. And it's all energy. It is essentially the energy and the nutrients and the compounds broken down into the earth. And that's what the earth eats. That's what all it is just energy. It's a bunch of dead stuff that be turned into a bunch of alive stuff. So we can learn something from nature, and that atheists have a very good point, or Scientology has a very good point. When you're broken down and that energy just is consumed into said grass or trees, that is actually what's going on. But there is another divine energy that is simply associated with you, that is directly correlating and responsible for your existence to begin with. And if you don't have a connection to this, if you don't cultivate this, if you aren't in tune with this and always creating a bond with this, then you're your ego. Then you are your ego. Then you wouldn't know how to identify with not being your ego. You would think that you are actually your body and that you are only your name. So, that's a basic understanding of how I've come to understand what the ego is, what purpose it serves, and how it is finite. It is not absolute. If you cultivate and develop your soul and become one with it, then your soul is obviously not finite. It is not limited to said physical world, because it is not from the physical world. In fact, this isn't even a physical world. This is actually the spiritual world in its lowest, densest, most thickest form, if you will. So everything that you see here with your ego is in the spirit world first, and then it filtrates. For example, the spirit world is the sky, and the earth would simply be the earth, or even underwater, for example. Whereas everything is more looser and fluid the higher you go, because the air is said thinner. See, it's a direct correlation to the way that the world and the nature of things work, because there's a cause and effect. So the higher you go up, the thinner the air, it's actually harder to breathe because of said air pockets, because the air is spread thin. So there's a lot more fluidity that's going on with air pockets, essentially, because there's more voids, if you will, physically speaking. And that's a perfect example of kind of how what's going on with the spirit world. It's more loosely oriented. It is the land of thought and dreams. So it kind of creates and destroys everything all at once, timelessly, simultaneously, without being subjugated or drugged down by any filtration. And by filtration, I mean, let's say, the water. Water, on being underwater, it's not being in air. It's denser. It's slower. Things don't happen just as fast. Sound moves faster, but you know what I mean. Physically speaking, you are essentially weighed down, if that makes sense. So that is a easy way to kind of get your mind working in that particular outlet, so that you can understand how you're not your ego, what you can do to not identify with your ego, and why it's important to not identify with your ego. And essentially, what is the difference and a physical representation of how you can kind of compare it, because everything has a cause and effect. All of it. So if the effect is the physical world, it is a no-brainer that there's a cause to the physical world. And at first and foremost, this world did not come into being first. In fact, this is probably last and the most densest. So I hope that clears up everything. I hope that makes sense to you, and I hope that makes some connections that you didn't have before. And I wish the best on your journey, and thanks for tuning in, and you have a wonderful day.